Hello, everyone. Welcome to Good Question. We are so glad that you are here. I am joined by Jovanna Javis. Did I say it right?
Yes, you're getting it.
I did. I got it. Okay, so she is an APC just across the street, literally, at the Adult Ministry Center. Can you tell us a little bit, what does APC stand for?
It is Associate Professional Counselor.
So you are trained and very skilled to be able to listen, know, understand, support people through mental health challenges, all of those types of things.
Yes, correct.
What does your 9 to 5 look like?
So 9 to 5 does not look like a 9 to 5, which is the fun fact of being a counselor. So my schedule does fluctuate. For me personally, most of my clients work or they're in school. I also have college students and like elementary, high school. So sometimes my day doesn't start until 2 and then I don't get off until 8. So I have a funky schedule, but that is my current crowd. I do have occasionally the people that want to come in at 10 in the morning, but they're rarities.
And for you, the kind of clients that you see, what are some of the things you're working through or that you kind of help with?
So depression, anxiety, trauma, as well as some bipolar, and then even life adjustment, which is big life change, losing your job, death of a family member. So I'll have people that will come in for just changes in life that they're having a difficult time adjusting to.
Well, obviously, you guys, this month, May, is Mental Health Awareness Month. We are coming off of a season where, man, that stuff was just so evident. If you didn't know you were struggling with it, maybe you discovered it. Or if you had struggled with it, it maybe came creeping back up. I know for myself, I am an anxious person, and COVID made me feel a little bit more crazy. Like and I don't say that flippantly. Like I literally felt like I was panicked about a lot of stuff that I'd never thought about before. And so people are coming out of that season and now maybe coming to terms or figuring out, man, there are some things I didn't really deal with during that. Or they're saying, hey, I now feel comfortable to get support, to get help. So this month has been such a useful tool for people to be able to connect to resources, to find out where they can go to get support and help. And you are one of those people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. No, and what you like, everything that you described for the last 2 years has been that. Anxiety was higher, uncertainty really triggered a lot of anxiety. We all went through a collective trauma together. People lost family members, so lots of grief, life change. Like we go from being at work to your whole life is upheaved. So yeah, absolutely. We've been recovering from a lot.
So this episode, you guys, we are calling it, How Do I Navigate Mental Health? So you're listening to Good Questions, a podcast for the curious by Compassion Christian Church. Jovanna, can you talk to me a little bit? What exactly is mental health and how do we define it?
Yeah, so mental health, and I don't have the technical APA version, but mental health is your health in regards to internal. So in regards to your thoughts, your emotions, and your behaviors as well. And how we would define that is it is normally self-report because I can't know what's going on inside of you. And so that's typically how it's defined. There's many assessments that can be run depending on the issues that a person is experiencing. How mental health disruptions can pop up is in people's sleep patterns, eating, so it can show up in your body. And so sometimes you might think that there's something physically wrong with you, but actually there's a mental health issue occurring.
So a lot of times our physical and mental health are kind of connected in a way we didn't even realize.
Yes.
It's crazy. One of the things that I think is interesting, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like mental health is becoming something people are talking about a little bit more, that we're open with sharing and discussing. I know like my parents' generation, they almost felt like this was a buzzword for a little bit. What's kind of triggered that? And also like, how do we come into this idea of like, this is something we should be talking about?
Yeah, so I think that the stigma is dropping more and more, and I think that there's a lot of things that are contributing to that. One is social media. Even though social media can be a double-sided coin, I think that people are talking about it more. So it's not uncommon for me to have clients come in, especially younger ones, that are talking about that they saw something on the internet or they saw something on TikTok and they were like, oh, I feel that. So I think it's that. And I think it's also people starting to understand how holistic we are as beings. Like if I'm physically sick with a cold, I can talk about having a cold, but if I can't go to sleep at night because of racing thoughts, being able to speak that and say, oh, that's not normal. And not only is it not normal, but I can get support for it. I think that there's so many more conversations about that occurring now.
Yeah, you bring up a really interesting point. That is the idea of like, we are so quick to grab the Advil if we have a headache, right? But like, if I'm feeling anxious and it's controlling my thoughts, it's not something I'm typically likely to say out loud because as a believer, I'm often like, well, I should probably just pray more or trust God.
Yeah.
And that's not something that we are typically always looking for support or help to do. We just kind of take the blame on ourselves.
Yeah.
So walk me through this idea of what are the different types of mental health concerns and kind of how do they present for people?
Yeah, so the different types, there's chemical imbalance. So most people are very aware of the chemical imbalance. There's the depression, anxiety. That is your brain's not producing enough chemicals, so you have a predisposition to those things. So you didn't do anything wrong, but because of the way your brain is set up, you have more of a leaning towards anxiousness or depression. Then there's the ones that are more like brain structure. So that's your ADHDs. So that is like when you see brain scans of someone with ADHD, there's parts of their brain that are, I don't want to say there's holes, but there's not as formed. And so those are the two different types. Is like, if we're talking about a chemical imbalance, or are we talking about a structural brain part, autism, intellectual disability. So they're all kind of grouped into one big happy family. But in terms of like chemical imbalances, that's where we talk about the most, like bipolar, depression, anxiety, how they manifest. Most people are becoming very familiar with anxiety and depression, but most mental illness is going to manifest in more than one quadrant of your life. And so that can be physically, socially, emotionally. And so what that might look like is having difficulty sleeping or sleeping too much, having a hard time eating or eating too much. Then there's also like people withdrawing from others. That's your social component. So not talking as much, not having motivation to engage with others, not being able to socialize. So that's your social anxiety. Like I can't leave my house because I feel so stressed out about leaving my house. And then emotions. People might feel really big highs and lows. So feeling really sad or really angry and not being able to kind of pinpoint what's drawing that. And then your thoughts, racing thoughts or difficulty concentrating.
So one of the things that I think is important we talk about, because I think at some point, a lot of people have felt some degree of anxiety, maybe depression, or some form of a mental, hey, this isn't where I'm normally at. But how do you know where the line is or how difficult or how much you're struggling and where you need to maybe seek help? Like, I don't know if the right way to describe it is a pressure point or this is something that I'm struggling with or this is just a normal emotion that feels bigger than my everyday.
Yeah. No,
does that make sense?
Yeah. So most mental health is going to be marked by pervasiveness. So when I meet with clients or even if you were to talk to your doctor, whichever route you choose to go, paperwork is going to ask in the last 2 weeks or in the last 6 months, because there's the difference kind of what you were talking about versus like a blimp, like, oh, I had an off day versus most of my days have been like this. Nearly every day has been like this. And so if we're talking about like one night of having a hard time going to sleep because you can't stop worrying, but tomorrow you bounce back, you struggle with worry. But if we're talking about like nearly every single day or every other day, I am having difficulty not excessively worrying, my thoughts are racing, then we would mark that as something where we would need to get further help.
How do we define worry versus anxiety or sadness versus depression?
Yeah. So what I tell clients, so this is what I normally tell clients, is that anxiety and depression take things a click too far. So by a click too far is being sad, like, oh man, I'm really sad that today was hard. Depression takes it to you're sad and you're worthless. So it takes it too far because there's a difference between like, oh, I'm crying and, oh, I can't stop crying and I don't want to get out of bed and maybe I don't want to be here. And so I would say that there's a severeness in depression that you can kind of, over time, especially if you struggle with depression, you'll begin to be able to tease out, like, when am I sad and when am I depressed? Because depressed is more than just sad. It kind of comes in a grouping of, like, fatigue, not being able to sleep, your eating habits, and isolating from others. If you're sad, you might not want to be around your friends, but you might not have that lack of motivation. You might not want to withdraw to the extent that depression is going to call you into withdrawal. And the same with anxiety is that there's worry, like, I'm worried about this test, and there's I'm worried about this test in your mind making it a catastrophe. I'm going to fail this test. I'm never going to get that job. I'm never going to be good enough. And so with both of them, what I have observed over the years of working with it is that anxiety and depression and other mental illnesses as well take things too far. So there's a difference between that wise mind or your more grounded mind and the depression mind and the anxiety mind.
Along those lines, is there a problem with calling it something that it's not, right? So if I am feeling, I'm a worried body by nature, right? Let's say, and I call it anxiety, right? But I don't know that it goes that way. I mean, is there a problem with over calling yourself out or categorizing it as something?
Yeah, I think that the only time it becomes a problem is if it leads to stagnation. So if it becomes, well, I'm just an anxious person versus I'm an anxious person, so let me go to prayer. I'm an anxious person, so let me go into meditation. I'm an anxious person, so I need to take this walk. I need to journal, which is vastly different than someone saying, I'm just anxious, so just deal, or I'm just going to deal.
Not complacent, almost.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
absolutely.
good. That's good. Let's talk a little bit. Obviously, we are in a church. We are talking about mental health. And man, I think one of the hardest things is figuring out, how does mental health play into my faith? Am I weak because I struggle with this? How do I biblically handle it? What do I do to make sure that I'm navigating this road appropriately as a believer? And obviously you are a believer who is a practicing counselor. So how do you kind of navigate this world?
Yeah. So I remember being in my master's courses, and when I was learning theories, the thing that popped into my head was like, oh man, this is how you take your thoughts captive. So with all the different theories and modes, there's so many, but there's not necessarily like a Christian theory or mode, but you even look at the most common one, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. Their whole method is centered on your thoughts control how you feel and how you behave. Take every thought captive. And the whole premise of that mode is that you pay attention to your thoughts, you track how they're affecting you, and then you learn how to rethink, how to stop those thoughts and reframe your thoughts. And so as I learned about the different modes, it was like, oh man, this is like how we can do this well. And so I completely get that it does feel like you're doing something wrong because it's something that's happening to you and it's internal, so other people can't see it. So I also have anxiety, and I remember telling people that, and they're like, you don't look anxious. And I'm like, in here it's crazy.
In here there's a hamster running crazy.
You can't see that? Because I feel it. And so it can feel like, man, I am over-worried, and the Bible tells me not to worry again and again. But I do think that if we look through at the scripture, I feel like I see it more now. Like I feel like I see the emotionality as David as an invitation that God's not upset at us if we are on a super low or super high. I see the different passages of people who are like, just like kill me, and God's like, take a nap and have a snack. Right?
Yes.
And so I think that when we see that, it's like, oh wow, like, we're not doing anything wrong. This is how we're made. And however you want to view it, like, okay, this is a part of sin or being fallen. But regardless, these things are things that are outside of your control. You're in your brain, you have an imbalance and you lean more towards that direction. That doesn't mean that you've done something wrong, but I do believe that God's given us the tools and the capacities to be able to walk with these things. Like something that I remember just even from like Bible studies is like God's not always going to take you out of the lion den. Sometimes he's just going to be with you in it. And so being able to look at it through that framework of that, because I think for me, even in my journey, is you would hear stories of people being healed of it. And you're like, oh man, I must be doing something wrong because she was healed of anxiety and I haven't been. And I don't think that means that God doesn't love you or that he's disappointed in you. I think that he's fully aware of our human condition and how it affects us, that some of us are more predisposed to depression. Some of us do have to fight not to give way to those lower thoughts. And
what you said is so important because I think we do see examples of it all over Scripture of people feeling those emotions that we're feeling. Like, it's anxiety, depression, mental health is not a new thing. Yes. This is something people have been dealing with since the beginning of mankind. So what's hard for us to process sometimes is we think the world we live in is so complex and so difficult. And truth is like, man, the Bible is perfect and it speaks to all of those things intentionally for us. Yeah. And like you're saying, the Psalms are literally David either crying out from the valley or singing on top of the mountain. Yeah. And so I find a lot of comfort even in like Jesus's life. I mean, I have been going through the study, obviously, of the cross right now because we just finished Easter season and all of that. And one of the things that has struck me is like this idea that, man, the way that Jesus was mocked while he was going to the cross is the same way that Satan tempted him in the desert. Yeah. And they knew exactly how to tempt him, and he had to wrestle those thoughts, those feelings, those emotions, just like we do now. And like some of those feelings are some of the same things that I'm feeling. Like, and so it's just, I'm constantly reminded in Scripture that like, A, these aren't new, and B, like, it's okay to feel that way. Yeah. So knowing that it's okay to feel that way, knowing that sometimes this is coming from a chemical imbalance, like you're talking about, it's not something I'm doing. My brain has literally been kind of wired this way. How do we not excuse the behavior, but also kind of work through it? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think that there's an invitation into nuance of how do I transform the way I look at this as like an observer. And that takes time to learn how to do, but almost like, because I think what most people, and especially Christians, will fall into is shaming themselves, and you can't shame yourself into change. And so
that's good.
Being able to say to yourself, okay, I am overthinking every single night. I have this excessive worry. And I don't want to excuse it like, oh, this is just who I am, but I also don't want to beat myself up because that's not going to lead me to change. So then what does it mean? What does taking thoughts captive look like for me? Does it look like journaling? Does it look like prayer journaling? Does it look like learning how to be able to sit in grounded silence with worship music playing in the background? What does that look like for me to be able to fully engage in my change, in being able to grow into a person who can take my thoughts captive? Because the thing is that we can't make some of these things go away. But what we can do is lessen the impact so that you can be alerted to like, oh, that's anxiety. Yeah. That's not the Holy Spirit. That's anxiety. Oh, that's depression. That's not sadness. And so that when you catch it, then can we engage in those tools? But we can't do that if you're shaming yourself. And we also can't do that if you've kind of like laid on the ground saying, this is just how my life is.
Oh, that's so good, Jovanna. Because honestly, like, I'm feeling a little convicted, y'all, because I realize I am sometimes like, that's just how I'm made. And I do some of those things, but I don't always go to it. Yeah. And I don't often take captive of my thoughts in that way of like, every time I'm spiraling, I can do it, right? Yeah. But the moment I feel anxiety, I don't catch it right then, right? I let it go for a little bit, and then I'm like, how did we get here?
Yeah, like, where are we?
Exactly. Yeah. Like, how did I end up in this like hole of like, where are we and how do I feel this way? So one of the things we talk about a lot is that it's important to name it sometimes. Is that true with mental health as well?
Yeah, no, I think that it's really helpful to name it. And something that I have clients do is there's this list of different like thinking errors or cognitive distortions. And I like for them to kind of look through the list and say, which one are you doing? So like one is catastrophizing, which is seeing the worst possible outcome of the situation. And so being able to say, I am catastrophizing right now, can be helpful for you to distinguish that not everything you think is true. And that's the biggest thing, is that not everything that goes through your head is true. But it is really easy because it's your head. And if you have an internal monologue, it's your thoughts, your voice.
And I'm never wrong.
Right. And I'm never wrong. So if my brain tells me I'm going to fail this test, well, I'm going to fail this test. Well, if we can say, I'm catastrophizing right now, or anxiety's in the room right now, that gives us distance so that we can reorient and like kind of separate from the story that our thoughts are creating in that moment.
When we talk about this, you and I are having an honest conversation, right? But this is not something that a lot of people feel open or comfortable talking about. How do we get to a place where we start conversations? Is this something worth talking about? Like, how do we go about talking about mental health? I just said that word a lot of times. But.
No, absolutely. So I think that one of the things is knowing that you're not alone. And what we bring into the light, we can heal. We can't heal what we keep in the dark. And so the first thing I would ask anybody that says, I just can't talk about this, is why? Like, is it shame that's keeping you, or embarrassment, or feeling like you're going to say it wrong? What is holding you back? And can we test that theory? So I could even think of, even for myself, the amount of times that like I might have been in a Bible study group or any group at all, and I'm like, oh, I don't know if I want to share this, and I share it, and there's more than likely another person who's like, me too, same.
Right.
And there's so much freedom in that. I think that that's why Jesus calls us into community with others, because
that's good.
We heal each other. When two or more are gathered, I think that it's so important to dig into that vulnerability. And it is scary. I don't want to take away from the fact that it is scary. But if you're afraid of what might happen on the other side, it might be more likely that anxiety is telling you a story that's not true.
Yeah, that's so good and useful. And honestly, that idea of like, we were made for community. We weren't meant to do this alone. And so why should I struggle with my thoughts alone? Like, when we speak it, sometimes we're more conscious of it and aware of it. I mean, even we see that in the Bible where Jesus is getting ready to heal a man, and he says, what do you want me to do? He knows this man is blind and he wants to see. But Jesus asks him, what do you need? And he says, I want to see. And that's like, sometimes we just have to speak what we need to people for them to know how they need to help or support or love us through that. So along that line, how do we go about asking for help? Whether that's from our friends, our family, or professionals?
Yeah, so what I would say, like if we look at each of those categories, so if you are struggling with depression or anxiety and you wanted to get support from friends, what I would suggest is just having an open conversation with the friends that you feel safe with, but also adding, if you already know something that might be very helpful to you, ask them for it. And so if it is like, hey, friends, like I am in a really low depressive state. If I reach out to you or if I call you, could you please encourage me? Or would you please pray with me? Or would you please, whatever it is that you know that you need, or will you please invite me out? Because I'm going to say no, but I need you to come and get me. Because oftentimes when we just give a blanket statement, people might do things out of well-intentioned and it might hit us wrong. And then we're like, no, see, that's why I don't tell anybody, because they're telling me to cheer up. And it's like, well, they don't know how to help you. If you already know, then let them know. If you don't know, please know that with most of your friends, especially if they're your safe friends, most of them will receive that. And that's just me thinking the best of people. But I think most people will receive well of like, hey, if I tell you I'm anxious, could you please tell me not to, like, please not say don't worry about it. But what you can do is like encourage me or remind me of that verse or, you know, pray with me over the phone or whatever it is. And the same for family. I would say the same thing with family is being able to convey what you're feeling and also share with them anything that you already know about yourself. In terms of professionals, there's so many different ways to go about that. If you have insurance, you can look at your insurance list to see who's on your list. Or you could go on, there's different websites. There's Psychology Today, or even if you type in Christian counselors in my area, names will pop up and populate. And whatever you feel comfortable with. Yeah. If you feel comfortable calling and leaving a voicemail, do that. If you feel more comfortable leaving an email, give an email. Something that's super new that I actually really love that I'm going to start telling people to do. So here you go, friends.
Hear it first, guys.
Is interview us. I've had people call and say, hey, here's a little quick thing of like what I'm dealing with. And so I just want to hear from you to make sure we would be a good fit.
Oh,
and I love that. I was like, oh, that's actually really wise because you are hiring me to be on your team.
Yeah.
That's essentially what you're doing is you're looking for who's going to be a good fit for me as a teammate in working through this together.
The next question along the lines of, okay, so we're talking about how do we start the conversation? Say someone approaches me and says, hey, I'm dealing with this. What is the best approach for me as a friend or somebody who has been considered as a safe person to be able to receive their words and then also respond in love?
Yeah, so my first thing is always to ask questions. So if someone approaches you and says, I've been really struggling with overthinking, like, oh, wow, I'm really sorry to hear that. Like, how is that impacting you right now? Like, when is that popping up for you? And how can I help you? And so I think that sometimes what can happen is if someone's telling us something really heavy, so there's like some people might be like, oh man, I've just been really overthinking this job. But if someone's like, man, I've just been feeling really hopeless and like I'm no good, that can trigger some anxiety in ourselves. So just remembering to stay grounded because your anxiety is being triggered by hearing someone speak about themselves in such a negative manner. And so being supportive, listening ear, and then giving some encouragement. What I would say is cautioning is try not to encourage them not to worry or not to be sad. Yeah. Because that's really outside of their control. They can't stop that right now. That is a them thing, but where they're at the moment, they're kind of at the peak. At the peak, we're really not able to think, problem solve, or rationalize. We have to be a little bit lower for that. But if someone is coming to you just sharing, I think the best thing you can do is listen, give support, and ask, like, can I pray for you? Can I share this verse with you? Because sometimes people will just want to say it and they're like, no verses, because that's going to just make me feel worse. Or like, please don't, because that's going to make me feel guilty. So I would say also ask.
That's good. And truthfully, can I like workshop something with you right now?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so let's say my friend reaches out to me and says, hey, Blair, I'm feeling really, really depressed these days, and I don't know where to go next. Like, what is the best way for me in love to respond to that? And to also, like you said, because when people come and bring those big things, it's easy for us in our humanness to get scared and to like just say whatever. Like, to say, you shouldn't feel like that. You have this, this, and this in your corner and whatever. What is the best way to actually respond?
Yeah. So if they said that they don't know what to do next, I would ask them, like, have you considered or are you open to going to therapy? And just depending on their answer, they might say, no, I don't want to go to therapy. And I always ask why, because sometimes there's a perception of like, well, it's not going to do anything. I'm just going to sit there and talk. And the last time I went to therapy, like no one helped me. And in that event, we can always share our personal story if we've been to therapy, or we can say, I'm really sorry that happened, and recommend, say, completely get that happened to you. Like, just even for myself, I'll tell people, like, therapists are different. And so it sounds like that was a person that wasn't the best match for you. But when you're ready, absolutely, you should look for someone who's going to teach you some things or like partner with you differently. So if they said that they don't know what to do next, I would probe for what they are ready to do next. So maybe they're not ready to go to therapy, but are they ready to talk to a pastor? Are they ready to talk to their doctor? What are they ready to do?
That's good. That's a great starting point. And then I think additionally, Jovanna, some people might even see the title of this episode and be like, meh, mental health. I don't deal with that. That's not my battle. How do people who feel like this isn't their struggle support and provide insight and love to others? Or like, are people immune to this?
Yeah. So my dream is that people would go to counseling like they go to get a yearly checkup. Because even if you don't have any of those things that have names, everyone has some kind of struggle, whether it be that they don't really know how to acknowledge their emotions, or maybe sometimes, they say no to things out of shyness or worry or self-esteem. So we all have some kind of battle that we could use. We all have junk. But I would say if you're like in that like optimal state, you're an average state, and you're listening to this and you're like, oh, I'm not really struggling with like, I have had worry in the past, but right now I don't. Well, I would say to support other people is empathy. Please have empathy, because I think that it can be really, and I understand, but like from a counselor perspective, but I understand that would be hard to watch a friend or a child or a spouse be depressed and see them in the bed every day or see them crying every day. And if you've never felt it, it feels very much like you're just giving up. And so I would say have empathy and really try to educate yourself on it if it's something that is in your home. So if it's a child or a spouse or a family member, educate yourself on it, because I think the more you understand that it's something that's outside of their control, the more it's easy to empathize. Because I think the biggest thing that most of us do when we're not experiencing something or we don't have any kind of like frame of reference for it is we tend to accidentally make it minimize. Like if you just got out of bed, like you should just get out of bed and go for a walk. And although that's true, they can't right now.
Right.
And so what can I do for you? I forget what it was, but I was listening to something years ago. And this one lady was talking about how when she was in a very low depressive state, her best friend would spoon feed her scripture. And I just love that image of someone coming alongside and saying, if you're in the pit, I'm here. And I can't go where you are, but I'm going to stay here. And if the most that you can handle right now is me speaking truth over you, that's what I shall do. And so I think that being able to know that what someone else is experiencing is outside of their control. Are there things that they could do? Absolutely. But at that moment that you're seeing them, this is a battle that they're fighting, and the best way to support them is to be empathetic and encouraging.
That's so good. And if I'm hearing you right, the best thing really for us to do is to come to people in love and curiosity, really, which we didn't plan this, you guys. This isn't our tagline on purpose, but it is that idea of like being curious and just walking with them and loving them through it.
Yeah. And it's okay if you can't. And so I think that also take care of yourself along the way. If you leave a conversation with someone who's depressed or anxious and you feel really heavy, go and engage in your tools. Journal, pray, cry, whatever it is that you need to do, because that does have a weight on it.
Yeah, that's good. We have to take care of ourselves while we're taking care of others.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anything last points you think are important, or like, man, if we didn't talk about this, we would be foolish?
Yeah. I think what I would say is that it's okay, that you're not alone, and that when you're ready, there are so many people around that are ready to help you. And I completely empathize with having bad experiences with therapists, having bad experiences with family members, even when you shared something. But my prayer is that you would find somebody, that God would direct support into your life, that you would have that Jonathan, that you would find that person that's going to walk alongside you, because you're definitely not alone.
That's so good. And truthfully, we all desire to be known and loved. And man, as believers, we know that we are known and loved, but as believers, we also need to prove that to others too. So thank you so much for being a part of this conversation, for sharing your tools. You guys, we are going to put in our notes section of this episode ways you can get in touch with Jovanna and just how you can get connected. We also have a resource guide that you and Dave Allgaier had put together for us. So we're going to share that for you guys in the episode notes. But we just want to thank you for joining us, and we hope that you'll come back with love and curiosity in your heart for the next good question. See you later.